These are selections from some political poems I wrote about 6 months ago. Some of the figures have changed since then, but the overall message remains the same, sadly. In a way of imperial power, it has always been about profit over people, exploiting the poor and impoverished for the purposes of economic prosperity for a wealthy and elite sector of our sick society. As always, all the sources are cited in the description. I will also put them at the end of these political, poetic pieces. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, the U.S. has given to Israel billions in military aid. Israel stands apart monetarily from many other nations. Either way, the U.S. arms industry gets paid. We say we want peace while waging war, yet people don't even know what we're fighting for. The U.S. and Israel are forever allied. About 1,500 Israelis have died fighting the terror of Hamas, they claim. But with the prevalent policy of hypocrisy, we don't treat both groups the same. Over 35,000 Palestinians have ceased to be. The Palestinians are the land's natives. Who decides who dies and who lives? If Hamas is a terrorist group, then what is every IDF troop? A double standard is always set when elites have money to get. The arms industry is looming whenever a war is booming. All such hypocrites, furthermore, are essentially rotten to the core. If we wish to see Hamas crumble like a tower, why does Israel get to stay in power? How can we claim Israel is in the right and that the Palestinians have no just reason to fight? Like how Robert Frost advocated for manifest destiny in his poem The Gift Outright, it's clear to see that, as we defend the colonizer, the native has no right to be. In that, we are a nation built and based on hypocrisy. Bob Dylan's Neighborhood Bully is an awful song. The music's fine, but the lyrics are all wrong. The war machine is fed by the soon-to-be-dead. The media would harass Gunter Grass for criticizing Israel in his poem What Must Be Said. Nuclear weaponry and good ties to the arms industry are the deterrent forces of man. Though they are weapons we should ban, having a deterrent force is the plan for all nations, including Iran. One is not an anti-Semite for stating what is right. People call Chomsky and Finkelstein self-hating Jews, but such ad hominem attacks are old news. And, as they've said themselves, even if it were true, how does it dismiss all the evidence they research and accrue? The real neighborhood bullies are those nations that have the most powerful and deadly munitions, who, hypocritically, seek to dispossess others from the things they themselves possess. The UN General Assembly commented quite clearly on the illegality of the expanding Israeli settlements within occupied Palestinian territory since 1967, as mapped out through UN Security Council Resolution 242. Israel, of course, does not agree, acquiring much of their territory by war and thus illegally. Even with Resolution 2334, further peace talks went out the door. Nearly all the world agrees with this two-state settlement, with the exception of Israel and the USA, preventing the establishment of peace at present, watching as the violence builds each day. Palestine's full UN membership was a no-go thanks to a U.S. veto. They remain a non-member observer thanks to U.S. decree, on par with the Holy See of Vatican City, who refrained from joining due to reasons of diplomacy. The ICC issued an arrest warrant for Netanyahu. What was Biden and the U.S. to do? With Biden seemingly on the neoliberal side, being the president of a country that currently makes money from a war economy, it's easy to see why he claimed there was no genocide happening against the people of Palestine. On the flesh of doves, the war hawks dined. According to Amnesty International, Operation Cast Lead saw 1,400 Palestinians dead. 300 Palestinian children died in the bloody scandal. For what reason did the Israeli nation seemingly attack a civilian population? Only about a dozen Israelis would die. Calling it self-defense seems an absurd lie. Around 5 years later, Amnesty International saw another attack on the Gaza capital. Like trimming the hedge or mowing the grass or weeds is how Israel refers to their deeds. Operation Protective Edge saw 2,000 Palestinians die, 500 of whom were children. It was seemingly only a matter of when so many Palestinians would die again. It doesn't take a genius to see that the great disparity in the death toll is far beyond most any other obscenity. And what has changed now from then? Homeless Palestinian civilians weep and cry, seeing the past return at present yet again. And when one asks why, all one can do is sigh and remind them that our country is part of a war economy, ruled and run by corporate businessmen. B'Tselem and BDS have accused Israel of apartheid, the discrimination one can no longer hide. When looking to the number of Palestinians who have died, most are now referring to it as a genocide. Some are saying it is the extermination of the indigenous population. Israel is not a vibrant democracy, as it exists in occupied Palestinian territory like B'Tselem claims. What then are Israel's aims? Most will say that it's clear to see that Israel was simply being retaliatory over the Hamas attack on October 7, 2023, where 1,100 Israelis, 700 civilians, and 40 children ceased to be. Truly, no one denies it was an atrocity, and no one denies there were crimes against humanity committed when reading about the rape and mutilation and the 250 hostages taken, 110 of whom have been returned. And yet, the act stands as a culmination of the oppression sustained through a one-sided war. Let's look to history to unravel this story. It started with the implementation of the Balfour Declaration, which, like a jolt, led to the Arab Revolt. And then the wars fought in 1948, which spurned peace since Israel took more than 80% of the Palestinians' land with its military, causing 700,000 Palestinian Arabs to flee. The nerve, or gall, or chutzpah, to not acknowledge the Nakba is beyond a terrible thing. It was essentially the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people by Israel. The tactics used were on a monstrous scale, going as far as to engage in biological warfare by poisoning water supplies. Civilian massacres and other scandalous affairs occurred, where it was fine to brutalize Palestinians, who had not the voice to criticize how they were being dehumanized. And then later, in Gaza, they were ghettoized. But for its crimes, will Israel ever be demonized? Either way, when studying the history, one can clearly see that this didn't start on October 7th, 2023. So what is the media trying to hide? And why does it only report on the story of one side? Or is it to just simply be yet another policy of hypocrisy? As a part of the Iran-Contra affair during the Iran-Iraq War, the First Gulf War, Israel sold U.S. weapons to Iran without much care. Operation Staunch was to put an end to that plan. The Lebanon hostage crisis was the official reason for selling the arms as far as Reagan was aware. Some believe the U.S. supported Iran during the First Gulf War due to the Iranian hostage crisis that occurred the year before. But Reagan was nothing more than a hypocritical actor. Gaining intel on Iraq's incomplete nuclear reactor was the primary factor. This was what Operation Opera ultimately foresaw. There is a new Cold War to deplore, and that is the Iran-Israel proxy war. Palestine's Hamas and Lebanon's Hezbollah aid Iran, for whom developing nukes is the primary plan. Needless to say, there were Lebanese citizens confined in Israeli prisons. So, Hezbollah captured 2 IDF soldiers and tried to trade them off like pawnbrokers. After Israel's border by Hezbollah was crossed, about 1,200 Lebanese citizens' lives were lost in the 2006 Lebanon War, which was fought for just 34 days. Due to this war's outcome, in an interview with none other than A.B. Goodman II, Norman Finkelstein had said that 2008's Operation Cast Lead was one of the best ways for Israel to get back at Iran, and making Gaza suffer was the plan. During the First Intifada, fairly peaceful Palestinian protests were met by Israeli soldiers armed with live ammo. The Palestinian protesters were exterminated like pests. The death toll was a substantial blow. About 150 Israelis and over 1,000 Palestinians were killed. The strongest weapon any Palestinian had was a Molotov cocktail. 7 years later, Palestinian uprisings would once again prevail. After the Camp David summit came to no avail, protests started again with the Second Intifada against Israel. The violence, however, this time was on a much larger scale. Suicide bombings, rocket attacks, airstrikes, and acts of assassination all pointed to the heightened severity of the situation. About 1,000 Israelis died, compared to 3,000 on the Palestinian side. One young man, by the name of Faris Odeh, protested by throwing rocks at an Israeli tank which was marching on its way. Odeh was 14 when he was killed by Israeli forces for again throwing rocks. Israel's justification to use lethal force against such an act seems to be a paradox. One must note the great disparities between the death counts of Palestinians versus Israelis. Though atrocities have been committed on each side, the imbalance of force used by both cannot be denied. To cite the UN, as of March 2024, more children have been killed there in Gaza in recent months than in 4 years of conflict worldwide. Over 13,000 children have reportedly died. The UN has yet, however, to admit that it constitutes genocide. Is it to be taken as a form of Zionist mania when claims of targeting civilians by Israel have been denied? The illegal blockade on Gaza is a sin. Gaza is described as an open-air prison. There's little water and food for any man, woman, or child. No one can leave, returning refugees exiled. Amidst this, Trump said Jerusalem was to be seen as Israel's capital city. Under Schumer's advice, he allegedly moved the U.S. Embassy. To limit fuel being added to the fire, the UN voted no to the move of the embassy, which was overturned with a U.S. veto. Then on May 14th, Israeli tanks and snipers met with Palestinian protesters that proved no real threat. But hatred never ceases as it stirs. Journalists, medical staff, and unarmed protesters were shot, perhaps even intentionally, as Amnesty International wrote, to inflict life-changing injury. Palestinians were shot at or below the knee, turning many of them into an amputee. During the Great March of Return along the Gaza border, it would be around 220 Palestinians that Israel would murder. To believe this is a war against Amalek from Exodus 17, as Netanyahu claims, is beyond vulgar and obscene. Despite the intent and number of those who died, the UN has still to confirm if Israel is committing genocide. It took the UN until 2001 to decide whether the Srebrenica massacre during the Bosnian War had even qualified. Several times over, Palestinians have tried nonviolent forms of protest. Each time, they have been met with violence, brutality, and crimes against their humanity. From October 7th, 2023 and onward, you know the rest. Like Edward Said, Norman Finkelstein comments well on the issue of Israel-Palestine. The two-state solution should not be denied. But can Israel and Palestine live side by side? And while Israel has a right to be, one wonders if they're engaged in a Holocaust industry. Noble protests for Palestine that I see let me know that I don't live in a democracy, since the protesters are made to look crazy by the mass media on every smartphone or TV. The U.S. will never fail to back Israel. 15,000 Palestinian children are dead. The Yahoo, Netanyahu too, is ill in the head. There is much to be said of the pride of those students who rallied against Israel's genocide, despite how the media made them look like loons, or else called them elites born with silver spoons. As Chomsky noted, the mass media will never sway from what the actual elites tell them to say. I have much admiration for the youth that fought and struggled for the truth. Yet public opinion holds no sway or dominion against the decree of the kingly and queenly elites that usurp democracy for a sense of aristocracy. AIPAC calls for the U.S. to back Israel. One may ask themselves what for, but from a business perspective, just follow the money trail. Remember that a large part of the economy is based on war. AIPAC is just another gear in the corporate machine that flows smoothly, aligned to the common theme that man is less important than money, which is made through beastly and horrible acts against humanity, all the while not operating on the basis of democracy. When Palestinians get blown up, protesters are told to shut up. Allies during World War II, further apart, the U.S. and USSR grew. McCarthyism and the Red Scare proved a scandalous affair. But Ukraine is still Russia's backyard. From joining the U.S.-backed NATO, they were barred. Asking Ukraine to join NATO was a slap in the face. In this world, it seems, war will forever have a place. Always is one trying to establish a new military base. Such actions are nothing but a disgrace. The elite leaders of the world are as cold as ice, and it's people who always pay the price. The world is run by madmen, and that's the way it's always been. No side is right in this swan song. Everybody here is guilty and wrong. When Iraq invaded and refused to withdraw from oily Kuwait, war was the next dish to be served on our plate. Political relations, which were once warm, grew cold quickly with Operation Desert Storm. Again, it doesn't take a smart brain to see how our former ally Saddam Hussein became another terrorist enemy. Political action is like a reflexive jerk of the knee, automatic and without much thought, like a flowing stream in which we're all caught. What else could be had but bombs over Baghdad? Truly is a bitch fighting wars to make elites more rich. It should be a fact that unnerves knowing Libya has massive oil reserves. With the Arab Spring, uprisings began to spawn. The U.S. aided through Operation Odyssey Dawn the fall of the dictatorship of Gaddafi. As to why, it shouldn't be too hard to see. Again, one doesn't need to be very smart to note that it wasn't done out of kindness of heart. NAFTA left many Americans jobless. Labor is often outsourced in excess. Foreign labor is cheaper in cost, ensuring less profit for companies is lost. When native Mexicans and farmers were being replaced, it was the easy LN that they embraced. Subcomandante Marcos fought for human rights, admiring Che Guevara's guerrilla insights. When free speech is censored on the internet under the guise of insensitivity, it serves the powers that be. Nothing is politically neutral, don't forget. Forcing political neutrality eliminates discussion and prevents any sense of dissension with the current order of oppression that controls everyone with the lies it spun. They say, just watch and follow the media machine and do what the algorithm recommends and tells you to. Israel, the USSR, and the UK armed the Republic of Nigeria against the people of Biafra. Harold Wilson had little to say. A blockade ensured starvation and a genocidal rape. Charles de Gaulle, knowing for granting all independence in Algeria, couldn't save those starved in Biafra. Him being too late sealed their fate. 500,000 or more starved to death. Ceased were the gasps of children's breath. What could be so precious upon the coastal soil? You undoubtedly already know the answer is oil. One only need to look to Operation Legacy or Frederick Forsyth's The Biafra Story. When colonized slaves are what men seek to unshackle, secret groups might try to put a hit on your head. The OAS wanted de Gaulle dead. A rebellious act can make fiction from fact. It was the day of the jackal. When Marxist Sandinistas overthrew the U.S.-backed Somoza family, what could the U.S. do? Like a play through foreign policy, the Contras then came in on scene, taught in PSYOP and guerrilla warfare. Threats to Nicaraguan business came to scare global elites who, relying on the war machine, implemented Executive Order 12513. The Sandinistas became a threat to national security. Selling arms to Iran became an affair. Does rescuing hostages from Hezbollah sound more fair? What else could they wish to gain? Was it all about crack cocaine? So many lives would be lost, but corporate interests never come at too great a cost. One of the most inhumane crimes ever done leading up to the Bangladesh Liberation War started with Operation Searchlight in 1971. The Pakistani military killed 1 million Bengals or more, while 250,000 Hindu women were raped. But from their war crimes, Pakistan escaped. Nixon and the U.S. turned a blind eye despite the blood telegram and massive public outcry. Thinking of the sex slaves and all those that had died, one may ask, how can one brush aside such a genocide? But if one were to inquire upon the reasoning as to why, they would learn that during the Cold War, Pakistan was a U.S. ally, and helped the U.S. open up relations with China through Kissinger and Nixon. Diplomacy is a sin. It's not about right or wrong, but on how to win. Deregulation is part of the neoliberal plan to remove the labor rights and freedoms of man. The mechanisms of the neoliberal are geared on exploitive capital. FDR's New Deal focused on relief, reform, and recovery, and was for the good of all in a greatly depressed society. Neoliberals, of course, saw this as communistic insanity. As such, the world's been in the neoliberals' grasp since 1980. In Operation Cyclone, the U.S. concocted a scheme to arm the Afghan Mujahideen, since Afghanistan, as it was well known, was backed by the Soviet Union. Some may say that it is a delusion that the U.S. funded terrorist groups and men like al-Qaeda or Osama bin Laden. Either way, in politics, it is quite noteworthy to see how quickly an ally can become an enemy. 90% of the world's opium is in Afghanistan. It has been documented that millions were made in the drug trade by the Taliban. The export value is in the billions. When I think of those addicted to drugs like codeine, heroin, oxycodone, and morphine, I'm glad that the Afghan nation has since gone on to ban its cultivation. Now, synthetic opioids like fentanyl take the poppy's place. Pharmaceutical companies are still a complete and utter disgrace. The Third World War, the Cold War, is done. The Fourth World War, as noted by the EZLN, has begun. Neoliberalism is the enemy, where the evil empire exists in complicity. Globalization and hegemony are linked to a one-world economy. Upon chaos and disorder stems a new world order. As addressed in The Shock Doctrine by Naomi Klein, with the implementation of shock therapy, countries can transition to a free market economy, guided under the policies of Friedman's neoliberal swine. Donald Ewan Cameron and the CIA, known for Project MKUltra and psychic driving, seem to be still very much with us till this day. Blended with the 1973 coup of Pinochet and Augusto's links to all the Chicago boys conniving, shock therapy is akin to torture in this way. Like martial law in Tiananmen Square, there is hell to pay when fighting against the tyranny imposed upon us by a predatory economy. To Klein, we have the IMF to thank for backing this shock doctrine along with the World Bank. When a nation's cutting-edge technology is developed primarily for the military, it creates nothing but a dystopian reality, where the war machine drives the economy. Perhaps instead it serves the five eyes that see all through echelon or else through hyperreality, predicts everything through the sentient world simulation, which charts the seas for every nation. Edward Snowden disclosed PRISM to the news, and despite the media's proclivity to go along with U.S. policy and the demands of a corporate economy, how could they pass up the massive amount of views they would gain from such a groundbreaking story? Financed by the U.S. during the Cold War, let's look as an example to Operation Condor, highlighting upon what the operation was started for and who monetarily benefited from all the blood and gore. Being a part of Operation Condor, Argentina's dirty war killed 20,000 or more. Any who went against neoliberal policy or who tried to instill true socialist democracy were slaughtered by death squads and the military junta that was said to be financed by America. Crimes against humanity were not on display for the world to see, as it remained a covert and clandestine activity. Men were killed by being dropped from great heights, commonly known and referred to as death flights. Due to the cruel reality of rape and torture, the war was deemed dirty. Pinochet and Contreras spies operated in Uruguay, Chile, Brazil, Bolivia, and Paraguay. Tens of thousands disappeared and died, with the numbers approaching genocide. Students, teachers, union leaders, artists, anarchists, leftists, and socialists were dropped to their deaths from the sky, or merely vanished in the blink of an eye. 2 years prior, Henry Kissinger, with all his lies, won the 1973 Nobel Peace Prize. When considering the Vietnam atrocity, one can only note the controversy and outright hypocrisy still to this day. That very year, he helped Nixon install Augusto Pinochet. NSSM 200 tried to control the populations of various foreign nations. There is always political unrest for fear of going against a U.S. interest. As Kissinger himself stated like a decree, you can control the world if you control the money. Milton Friedman's neoliberal policy is what guides the U.S. economy. Only a blood-sucking tick adheres to realpolitik. And yet, the entire world is in a state so dire, trying to satiate the bloodlust of this vampire. One only need to look at the arms industries and the billions made in exporting arms to foreign countries. What cyber weapons built by the NSA or CIA will come into future play? The Chinese group ATP3 and the Shadow Brokers TSB exposed Eternal Blue leading to WannaCry. It is certainly no lie to note the dangers to national security such tools pose in terms of exploitability. One can note Vault 7 from WikiLeaks to show how espionage truly peaks. Concerned about the legality of a surveillance state, Julian Assange and Edward Snowden sealed their fate. Information is something the government can easily seize. PRISM gave public data to the government to see, obtained from various internet companies in clear violation of users' privacy, done again in the name of security and for the good of public safety. Again, all falls into a constant state of exception, where freedoms are lost under the guise of protection. The deep state may be seen as a conspiracy, but it makes sense when one considers elite theory and how elites essentially rule, using power institutes as their tool. The OSS led to the CIA, committing their coups along the way. Truman later saw the CIA being akin to the Gestapo, casting over U.S. history a long shadow. Concerning the media, who hasn't heard of Operation Mockingbird? Release of the family jewels led to the Church Committee, making the actions of the CIA available for all to see. After 9/11 with the Patriot Act, numerous American freedoms were sacked. States of exception and emergencies are excuses to pass unjust and anti-democratic policies done under the guise of public safety and, of course, national security. When you look to acts of imperial power, you get things like the Phoenix program's Bell telephone hour. Nixon and Kissinger's secret bombing of Cambodia led to Pol Pot's rise. The undetonated bombs like landmines still today produce shrieks and cries. Those who now lie dead and eternally rest do so because they went against a U.S. interest. The strong Indonesian and U.S. relation led to the invasion of the East Timorese nation. Operation Lotus led to 100,000 being killed. U.S. military aid caused more blood to be spilled. Fighting for true democracy, one must display a sense of defiance, though death often ensures if caught in the way of a U.S. alliance. The Bangladesh genocide was brushed aside. Never should one defy a U.S. ally. Used as but one of many puppeteering toys under the neoliberal sway of the Chicago Boys, how many were tortured and killed in Chile under the U.S.-backed dictator Augusto Pinochet? The public rarely gets to see covert crimes against humanity. Christopher Hitchens wrote of Henry Kissinger and the war crimes he committed, of which foreign nations had to endure. Kissinger was never brought before a juror, and even if he were, he would have probably been acquitted. War criminals get off scot-free, without jail time or even a fine or fee. As spoken of in Pablo Neruda's United Fruit Company, it is sickening to see the things men do for money. Operation PB's success was yet another U.S. coup that undemocratically and imperially overthrew the Guatemalan government to install a dictatorial U.S.-backed puppet, making it easier to guarantee workers could be exploited for more productivity. It makes one's stomach turn when coming to learn of Chiquita's history and how their banana plantations were linked to CIA coups in foreign nations. Men will continually be exploited or else die and fight for resources like food as the world loses its appetite. As Engels said to Marx in 1856, Ireland may be regarded as the earliest English colony. Irish Catholics seeking to be free knew a battle was ahead. Historically, no aid by the Brits was given during the Irish potato famine. 1916's Easter Rising was an Irish uprising. Amidst the wearing fit, a treaty was soon brought forth, and so the Irish Catholic South was split from the Protestant and Loyalist North. The Troubles, as they say, go back a long way. Eventually, clashes occurred later on in Derry. Then came a greater divide with the Battle of Bogside. The British Army historically can't help but fail, mucking things up just as they did with Palestine and Israel. W.B. Yeats and Seamus Heaney wrote of the Troubles through their poetry. Support for the IRA rose greatly after Bloody Sunday, where the priest Edward Daly tried to get those who were injured to safety. The IRA responded fast with 22 car bombings near Belfast. Needless to say, the bombings didn't cease. With them, was there loss for any hope for peace? Perhaps, believing herself engaged in a war, Margaret Thatcher said no settlements for paramilitary prisoners would be done. 10 men died in the Irish hunger strikes of 1981. The IRA wanted Thatcher dead. What could stop such bloodshed? Eventually, the Good Friday Agreement of 1998 would quell the Troubles, but not end the hate. But who, I ask, is to be more bastardized, the colonizer or the colonized? The Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, the United Microelectronic Company, UMC, as well as MediaTek and ASE, make up the Taiwanese semiconductor industry. South Korea's Samsung Company is the only real competition currently. With Trump's America First ideology, tariffs were placed upon China and other countries. Taiwan thus becomes important economically. This conflicts, of course, with the One China policy, which was a part of the Shanghai Communique, where Kissinger and Nixon, representing the USA, admitted that China and Taiwan were seen as one united entity. One sees many blood-sucking ticks in the world of technopolitics. Hundreds of U.S. military bases are stationed around the world today, but by encircling China, there will be hell to pay. No one wants to see World War III. What future roles will Japan, South Korea, and the country of India have to play as this mad world falls further into disarray? U.S. wars are the paths on which all things are made. Like terror, communism, and drugs, this is now the war on trade. The state of exception will always loom, just as a new war begins to bloom. Rotten and corrupt to the core, all elites can do is wage war. The U.S. having more people in prison than China is a desecration, especially when China has more than 4 times the population. Penal labor saves corporations lots of money, Incarcerated prisoners produce products essentially for free. The 13th Amendment allows for involuntary servitude or slavery if one is found guilty of a felony. The Kids for Cash scandal highlights upon the exploitability of manipulating the justice system throughout the country. Everyone already knows the names of all the major companies that profit most from this penal form of slavery. Start boycotting these companies, slave-produced goods and commodities. The massacre at Damour was revenge for Karantina. Avenging Damour, there came the massacre of Sabra and Shatila, which was the slaughter of Palestinian refugees in Beirut by the IDF and Lebanese during the Lebanese Civil War. The brutality and inhumanity is beyond horror. Some tales of war should not be told. It's cliché to say, but revenge is a dish best served cold.